Hey everybody, Trey here. Welcome back to another forecast discussion. We've reached the first day of our multi-day stretch of severe weather from the plains into the southeast. The SPC has maintained the slight risk for today, Sunday, March 24th, from parts of western Kansas up to the Kansas-Nebraska border down into western and central Oklahoma. All hazards on the table for today. We do have a tornado risk in a 5% capacity there from southwest and central Kansas down into much of western Oklahoma. Places like Oklahoma City, Wichita, Woodward, Oklahoma, and areas in between under the gun for that 5%, that greatest tornado risk for today. 2% does extend within the marginal risk along the dry line and up to the northeast of the surface low there into far southwest Nebraska. We also have a large hail threat, a large hail going to be a player today as well in that slight risk corridor, as well as damaging winds focused on that south central Kansas into northwest Oklahoma corridor. So all hazards on the table for today. Very interesting setup. I think this is the setup that storm chasers are focusing in on the most, as it is a pretty good looking setup. A couple of flies in the ointment still that need to be worked out, but overall very good looking setup for an all hazards threat today. We're going to get into that and really focus on today in this video, but there is of course a risk for tomorrow as well. We do have a slight risk that has been outlined, really centered on Louisiana and Mississippi, far east Texas, all of Louisiana, much of Mississippi, and southern and southeast Arkansas under the gun for that greatest severe weather threat tomorrow in the slight risk area. We do have a little marginal risk up here for western Iowa. We talked about that in our last video, how we could see a severe weather risk area outlined for that portion of the event ahead of the surface low. The SPC has gone ahead and added a marginal risk level 1 out of 5 in that area. Not expecting a high-end threat in this area as well. Kind of some of the things we looked at in the last video have backed off just a little bit. But there is still enough to warrant a severe threat up there, but it is going to be a low-end threat. And really, the main threat is going to be down here in the slight risk area for tomorrow's setup, Monday, March 25th. Tornado and damaging wind threat is going to be the real key in that southern mode. 5% tornado risk there within the slight risk, really Louisiana into much of Mississippi. That threat will persist into the overnight hours there. We also have a damaging wind threat as well. Large hail, not going to be much of an issue in that area. The Iowa risk going to maintain that low-end hail and wind risk. Could see a tornado or two. Would not be surprised to see a tornado report come out of that setup up there in Iowa, but SPC does not see a tornado risk with that convection tomorrow. Mostly just a wind and hail risk. But again, our main threat for tomorrow is going to be down in that slight risk area, centered on Louisiana and Mississippi. Just want to thank everybody for the well wishes since the last video. As you recall, and you can probably still tell in my voice, I've been a little bit under the weather the last few days, but feeling much, much better today. So thank you all for the well wishes, and we are full steam ahead for today's setup. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Let's dive into our upper air maps here first. This is the 500 millibar map at present. And right away, you see this big old trough centered across the western portion of the country, digging down into Mexico. Very highly amplified trough that this is. This is really a textbook-looking trough for severe weather in the central and southern plains. You see our main trough back in here, kind of a positively tilted trough as a whole, but this negatively tilted lead shortwave is going to be our main player for our severe threat today. That's going to swing through over the next several hours and really be timed perfectly here out across western Kansas, western Oklahoma for the initiation of storms at peak heating today. So oftentimes we talk this early in the season about how troughs are mistimed. They come through maybe in the overnight hours or too early. Not this one. This looks to be very, very well timed for peak solar heating. That means we're going to see storms initiate along the dry line this afternoon as they're supposed to, as that instability is maximized. And we're going to see even more maximization of the instability with such cold air at the center of this trough seeping into the region. You can see the contours here. These red dashed contours are the isotherms, lines of equal temperature. You can see some minus 26, minus 28 there at the center of this trough, even farther out to the periphery of the trough, negative 24, negative 22 degrees Celsius. That is very, very cold air aloft, and that is going to seep in to this region, continue to seep into this region as we go into the afternoon. So that is going to help really destabilize the atmosphere, steepen lapse rates aloft, and provide plenty of instability, despite what we talked about in our last video, which is somewhat limited moisture. Now, I am liking what I'm seeing this morning as far as moisture goes. We'll get into that in a second, but overall, we're going to have a little bit limited moisture return for this particular setup. Dew point's probably going to max out in the low to mid 50s at best throughout the day today. But overall, kinematically, this is a very, very impressive looking trough. And as a result, as we've started to see this southwesterly flow traverse the Rockies, we have started to see very intense surface cyclone development to the lee of the Rockies. You can see a very, very tight pressure gradient across the plains ahead of this very broad surface low centered over Colorado. That is expected to tighten, especially this lobe here out across eastern Colorado. That is expected to deepen considerably as we go through the day today. You can see that the surface pressure there already at about 992 millibars. That is going to plummet into the 980s. So a very, very intense surface low. Already the pressure gradient out ahead of this surface low is very, very strong. Here in Norman, we are experiencing some really strong winds at this point. The low-level flow out of the south is really, really ripping. And we have turned into a full fire hose to really try to get this moisture up into the Gulf. We talked about, or up from the Gulf into our region. We talked about in our last video how we had a little bit of a system here over the Gulf the last couple of days, and even yesterday we had low-level flow that was still very much out of the north yesterday morning and into the afternoon. That quickly flipped around to south as this surface low started to develop, and we've continued that strong southerly flow here this morning, especially here across the central and southern plains where our low-level jet is cranking. Speaking of our low-level jet, 850 millibar flow, and you can see 50 to 55 plus knots of flow all the way up from the Midwest down through the central and southern plains into Texas out of the south. That is a very strong low-level jet, and that is expected with the continuation of strengthening of this low-level cyclone throughout the day. That low-level jet is going to stay very, very strong throughout going into the afternoon for the prime time with this setup, and even going to increase as we get towards sunset and after sunset. So we are expecting to see that moisture try to make its way northward, especially in areas with southern extent in this setup, Oklahoma into Texas, going to have much richer moisture here than areas farther north. Maybe not much richer moisture, but we'll certainly see a little bit stronger, a little bit higher dew points down here across southern portions of the risk area as opposed to Kansas, although overall we're expecting to see very favorable enough moisture for a robust severe threat with this setup. Now, as I said, the overall moisture that we're seeing right now may be a little bit better than what models were showing a couple of days ago. Let's go ahead and take a look at our surface dew points here, our surface raw surface data. We already have 50s dew points well up into Kansas here. You see into south central and southern Kansas, we have dew points in the low to almost mid 50s there. Pittsburgh, Kansas at 54 degrees. So 55 degree dew point there at, that looks to be Alva, Oklahoma, just northeast of the Woodward area. So we are seeing pretty decent moisture already making its way up into this region. With more moisture on the way, low to mid 50s still widespread down here across Texas, our source region. That is going to get advected northward pretty rapidly throughout the day as we have, as you can see, 20 to 25, 30 knots of southerly or south-southeasterly flow trying to pump that moisture into the region. Now, again, we talked about this in our last video. One of the bugaboos with this setup was this little pocket of dry air that we saw that emanated from far south Texas this morning and was going to make its way north to the east of the developing dry line this afternoon. You can see exactly where that pocket is. We see 50s dew points all the way up almost to the New Mexico-Texas border, but notice this little pocket right in here of very much cratered dew points around 40 to 45 degrees there, right in that little pocket. And that again is going to shift northward on this southerly flow east of the dry line today. And that is going to be, I think, an initial bugaboo with this particular setup. We're going to see dry air overspread the initiation region east of the dry line here, east of the surface low from southwest Kansas into western Oklahoma. And so initial updrafts may struggle for quite a while as this little dry pocket makes its way north. But that dry pocket's going to continue to move off to the north and kind of get, I'm trying to think of the word here, maybe immersed and kind of negated a little bit by the continued moisture advection to its south. So I think initially that dry pocket's going to play a role. And we talked about it. You know, the cause could be some downsloping winds off the higher terrain of Mexico, bringing some drier air downward. I've heard some subsidence on the backside of a 700 millibar shortwave. Whatever the cause is, it doesn't matter. The fact is that we are dealing with this particular fly in the ointment. But again, I think it's going to wash out a little bit as we go through the day, and especially after probably 21-22Z, going closer to sunset, as that moisture advection will continue in earnest southeast of that surface low into parts of Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas. So we should have that little bit of a dry pocket washout as we go through the day today. So shouldn't be much of an issue, especially later on in the event as we get continued development along the dry line going into the late afternoon, early evening hours closer to sunset. But overall, very favorable look here at the surface, especially for this time of year. If we were to have 60s dew points with these kind of kinematics in play, this would certainly be a pretty significant tornado event, I believe. But we are dealing with a little bit less moisture. It is March, but I think we will have adequate moisture given the kinematics aloft and the very cold air aloft helping to compensate for the weaker moisture, and therefore we will see a robust severe threat with this setup and an all hazards threat develop, especially closer to sunset again. As that dry air gets worked out, we get better moisture to move in. And this kind of corridor here, southern Kansas into western Oklahoma, I think is going to be our hot spot. And the overlap of the best kinematics with the slightly better moisture making its way in going into the late afternoon and early evening hours. But overall, dry line going to develop. You already see the dry line developing out here across the New Mexico-Texas border region. Dew points in the 20s and 30s back here in eastern New Mexico. 40s and 50s out here across the Texas Panhandle into the Texas South Plains. So dry line very much in progress of tightening up, and that will mix to the east a little bit today and probably set up somewhere here in southwest Kansas into far western Oklahoma, and will be our initiation mechanism for storms as we go into the afternoon today. Let's take a look at some soundings from this morning. This is the 12Z sounding at Norman, Oklahoma, so 7 a.m. Central Daylight Time. This is what the weather balloon saw as it went up in the atmosphere here in Norman. Few things to note right off the bat. We do see fairly deep moisture here in the low levels. That moist layer extends up just above 850 millibars. So for March, definitely somewhat deeper moisture at this point, even though the surface dew points may be on the lower margins for severe weather. And again, 55 over 49 here at this point in the morning at Norman, with strong, warm, moist advection going to persist through the day. These dew points definitely going to bump up into the low to mid 50s by late this afternoon, especially after that little dry pocket moves through. So moisture really, even though it is on the lower side for robust severe weather, not really going to be an issue in this particular setup because of the strong kinematics aloft especially. So pretty deep moisture at this point here at Norman. We do see a bit of dry warmer air here aloft, up above 850 millibars. That is a pretty strong cap on the atmosphere, but that is expected to erode pretty rapidly as we go into the afternoon. With such strong kinematics at play and that cold air overspreading the region, plus solar insolation, solar heating after this morning batch of clouds moves through. Here's our visible satellite right now. So you can see quite a bit of cloud cover across the region, but we do have lots of clearing moving in from the west. That is going to allow for those surface temperatures to rise, and we will see some pretty good surface heating along with that colder air aloft and the kinematics at play. That is going to really lift and cool this capping inversion rapidly. So we should see this capping inversion erode fully by probably mid-afternoon at the earliest. So that this, even though we do see a pretty strong warm nose here, that should not be too much of an issue going into the afternoon. So our thermodynamics expected to improve through the day, and our wind profile expected to probably stay somewhat similar to this as we go into the afternoon as well. We will see a little bit stronger flow aloft as the trough moves in. But right now, very strong warm advection ongoing, as evidenced by the strongly veering and strengthening winds in the low levels of the atmosphere. You can already see 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative velocity approaching 500 meters squared per second squared. And again, with intensification of the surface low expected, that low-level jet is going to remain pretty strong throughout the day. So we should see these hodographs remain pretty large and clockwise curved through the afternoon. And that is going to lead to that tornado threat as we go into the afternoon hours as well. With such strong low-level shear in place, would not be surprised to see a strong tornado or two conditionally from this setup, as discrete supercells are likely. So if we can get maybe in areas farther to the south, far southern Kansas into western Oklahoma, where moisture is just a little bit better, we may see a strong tornado or two if a discrete supercell can persist. But right now the SPC does not have that strong tornado threat highlighted, but with these wind profiles at play, and you'll see some of the model forecast soundings here in just a second, very, very impressive. So, again, if we had 60s dew points with this setup, this would be a pretty significant dry line tornado type setup with significant tornadoes possible, but the low level moisture being a little bit on the margins for tornadic activity, strong tornadic activity going to keep that threat at bay, but I still think we'll see a few tornadoes from this setup, and perhaps a strong tornado or two, especially with areas farther south where the moisture is just slightly better, especially going into the evening hours. But very impressive wind profile, strong deep layer shear, for supercells and strong low-level shear for tornadic activity with this event. Let's go down to Fort Worth, much of the same, decently deep moisture up to about 850 millibars, capping inversion on the atmosphere. Again, very impressive looking wind profile, and that is expected to stay the same with this little kink here expected to work itself out with stronger 500 millibar flow expected to move in, which is right about the 6 kilometer level, expected to move in over the next several hours. So this little kink is going to get worked out, and we're going to have very nice looking photographs here for a supercell, perhaps tornadic supercell threat going into the afternoon. Down here at Del Rio, just to look at kind of where our deeper moisture is located right now, we do see somewhat deeper moisture here down here at Del Rio, extending up to about 800 millibars or so, a little bit deeper than in areas farther north. So with that southerly flow in the low levels expected to advect this low-level air mass into the region, would expect to see perhaps a slight deepening of the low-level moisture as we go into the afternoon. And so we should have high-quality moisture, even though the surface dew points, again, are a little bit on the low side. The quality and depth of that moisture looks to be pretty good with this setup. All right, let's look at some model data. This is the 12Z NAM that is coming in as we record this video. We'll start out at 500 millibars, and here again is our trough centered across the western portion of the U.S. with that little lead shortwave, negatively tilted lead shortwave moving across the desert southwest this morning. You'll see as we go into the afternoon, that shortwave ejects into the southern and central plains, timed perfectly for our severe weather event this afternoon. This is at 21Z, 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time, and here is our shortwave right in there, starting to impinge upon western Oklahoma, southwest Kansas, which is where the dry line is going to set up. So this could really not be timed any better for our severe weather threat later today. Now again, our dry air is going to be overspreading the area just east of the dry line from western Oklahoma into southwest Kansas at this point. But again, I think we should see pretty quick recovery behind that. So storms will, again, initiate probably in that drier air mass by 20 to 21Z. 3 to 4 p.m., and they might struggle for a little bit with that dry air in play, but as that quickly moves out and washes out, we should see those dew points recover quickly and a better air mass for those storms to work with going into the later afternoon and early evening hours closer to 0Z. And so just a very, very favorable look here kinematically, especially at 500 millibars for a severe threat in the central and southern plains. This is what you want to see. Big old trough with a nice little subtle lead shortwave here for these southern plains severe weather events, and that's exactly what we have today. Looking at 250 millibars as well, nice defluence aloft. Those winds across western Kansas, more out of the south, winds across the Red River region into North Texas out of the almost due west. So very nice defluence aloft across this region, providing that rising motion and subtle forcing for ascent for severe storms ahead of the dry line this afternoon. So our mid and upper level pattern, pretty textbook kinematically for a severe weather threat in the central and southern plains. Let's go down to the surface and see how that surface low develops through the afternoon and evening. I'm going to go to our central plains sector. So right now you see that surface low starting to develop, pretty broad surface low, but starting to consolidate there across eastern Colorado. Strong pressure gradient over the plains. You can see what happens as we go into the afternoon. That surface low tightens dramatically across southeast Colorado into the Oklahoma and Texas panhandles. Now that is a little bit farther south than what we saw with previous model runs. I'll shift to our southern plains sector here. And actually, let me go to our central plains sector, and I'll show you the previous couple of runs here. So this is what it's currently showing. You can see here, back a few days ago, we saw a little bit more of a northward shift in this surface low center, really centered over western Kansas. This is at 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time this evening. Surface low in western Kansas, we've seen a little bit of a shift toward a farther southwest surface low centered over southeast Colorado, kind of that Oklahoma panhandle, northeast New Mexico, southeast Colorado triple point area with this particular NAM run. So we are expecting to see a little bit farther south shift in, I think, the best area for storm and for more robust storms. That's why I'm liking this southern Kansas to western Oklahoma corridor, because that is right ahead of the surface low, right ahead of the dry line, and should be where our most favorable ingredients for severe storms are. But definitely an interesting shift there in the models over the past several runs. So overall, surface low there in southeast Colorado. Nice dry line developing. You can see the wind shift along the dry line there. Westerly winds to the west of the dry line. Nice strong southerly flow ahead of the dry line there across Texas into Oklahoma. These surface temperatures much too cool across this region. We know what the NAM does. It has a very strong cool bias here. I do think this might be a little too far to the southwest. Here, the dry line already almost back into the eastern Texas panhandle. I do think that is a little bit far to the west. We'll just have to wait and see where that sets up. But with the dry line currently somewhere here across the Texas-New Mexico border region, that is going to mix east later on today and end up somewhere here, probably along the Texas-Oklahoma border region, maybe just east, just west, up into southwest Kansas. Not really going to matter where it sets up. That dry line is going to be our initiating boundary for severe convection later on, and so that will be what we need to watch for as far as positioning later on today for storm chasing especially, and that the greatest threat for severe weather going to be east of that dry line. So let's look at moisture here as well. So again, here is our dew point map at this point. There's our little dry pocket down in south central Texas there. 50s dew points again all the way up into Kansas and Oklahoma at this point. Moisture, let's see. So we're just before 15Z right now as we're recording this. The NAM has 50, 51 dew points, 52 dew points here across western Oklahoma, southwest Kansas. If we were to go back to our surface map, that seems to be a little bit underdone at this point. You see some 54, 55 degree in there, 56 there at Elk City. That is pretty impressive. Let's check the Oklahoma mesonet just to see how accurate that is. The Oklahoma mesonet, I tend to favor a little bit more than these broad scale surface observations for these setups, especially for Oklahoma setups. So let's see what we got going on right now here across western Oklahoma. So those readings may be a little bit on the high side, maybe a little bit erroneous there across this region. We're seeing widespread 50 to 52, 53 dew points across the region, some 54s down here in far southwest Oklahoma. So moisture doing pretty well. And comparing it to our NAM, that does seem to be pretty good, pretty solid at this point in the day. So pretty good moisture initialization here by the NAM, especially in the first 3 hours of the model. You see then, as that dry pocket moves north to the east of the dry line, that dry line starts to tighten up there across the Texas and Oklahoma panhandle, but that little pocket of drier air overspreads the area. This is at 18Z, so 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time today. You can see that little bit of pocket of crater dew points right out ahead of the developing dry line. So that's 18Z, that's 21Z. You see that pocket still kind of right there across the eastern Texas panhandle, western Oklahoma, southwest Kansas, but you can see right down to the south, much better moisture making its way in right behind it. So 21Z, so 4 p.m., this is 7 p.m., and we've really recovered dew points nicely out across this area, far southern Kansas into western Oklahoma, especially down here in western Oklahoma. We're starting to see some upper 50s dew points creep in. And again, the NAM tends to overdo moisture just a little bit, so a dew point of 55 degrees might not be all that out of the realm of possibility down here. Maybe not 57. We'll see how rapid that moisture advection can get in here. With such strong low-level flow out of the southeast, we very well could see some of those upper 50s dew points start to make their way in by 0Z. This is 7 p.m., so definitely we recover nicely as far as the low-level moisture goes here across far southern Kansas into western Oklahoma by this evening. So I think this is when storms are going to start to get going. 21 to 0Z, so 4 to 7 p.m. as that dry pocket moves to the north, impacting portions of western Kansas. So this portion of the risk area may be a little bit, may struggle a little bit more, and if we have additional updrafts down here along this little nice dry line bulge that develops. We've talked about dry line bulges before and how they can be favorite areas for storm initiation and robust severe weather in these events. Ahead of the dryline bulge, when storms fire here later on this afternoon, they will have the best chance, I think, to produce robust severe weather, as much better moisture will be moving in behind that little dry pocket aloft. Going into the evening hours here, that moisture continues to stream northward, very tight dry line as that dry line shifts east. Probably by this point, the Pacific front, you can see the little bit of drier boundary back in here. It's a little bit tough to tell, but we'll have some sort of Pacific front making its way off to the east, a little bit of a cold front behind the dry line. That will catch up to the dry line this evening, and probably by 9 p.m. to midnight or so, and then the threat will shift off to the east pretty rapidly as we go into the evening and overnight hours tonight into tomorrow morning. But plenty of moisture making its way up here. We should see probably as that Pacific front overtakes the dry line, strong convergence along that boundary. So additional storm development is likely down here from south central Oklahoma into central Texas. Better moisture here. We will still have that strong low-level wind profile to deal with, so we could see a few embedded tornadoes overnight as the system moves off to the east. going into the overnight hours into tomorrow morning, and we should see a gradual transition of the storm mode to a more linear organization as this Pacific front overtakes the dry line from especially Oklahoma down into Texas later on. But for the first several hours of this event, discrete supercells are likely. Let's take a look at the storm mode here. So this is going to be at 0Z. We'll say 0Z. So this is our dry line here. And we'll pull up the overall, shear vectors with respect to the initiating boundary. So here are our shear vectors, and that is absolutely textbook for a discrete supercell environment. Those shear vectors, pretty much about 75, 80 degrees of perpendicularity off the dry line. So that is pretty much the optimal range for maintaining discrete supercells. You don't really want purely perpendicular flow shear vectors with respect to the dry line, as that can, with respect to the initiating boundary, as that can cause a little bit more storm interaction and degrade the mode even with a perpendicular component, a strong perpendicular component to the shear vectors with respect to the initiating boundary. Here, not quite purely perpendicular, a little bit of an angle off the dry line, but that 75, 80 degree angle there off the dry line, pretty much optimal to maintain discrete supercells for quite a while in this setup. So the initial mode for several hours from storm initiation through probably early to mid-evening should be discrete supercells before the forcing increases and we see a transition to more of a line from Oklahoma down into Texas. But overall, this is, again, I keep going back to this from a storm chasing perspective. If we had a 60s dew points with this setup, this would be a tornado outbreak type setup for sure. With such strong kinematics in play, a discrete supercell mode favored, this would for sure be a tornado outbreak type situation. But thankfully for the folks here in Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, the moisture definitely going to be on the margins. And when the moisture does increase going into the evening hours, the storm mode will degrade into more of a line. So that will temper the overall significant tornado threat as well. But man, this looks pretty textbook for a Southern Plains severe threat here with this dryline and dryline bulge there moving into western Oklahoma. So it looks like this corridor to me here right ahead of the dry line, southwest Kansas, into northwest Oklahoma, far western Oklahoma, the I-40 corridor. That is going to be our favorite area for discrete supercells with an all-hazard threat with a little bit better moisture here moving towards sunset. So very, very favorable look to this overall setup. Let's take a few soundings now just to give you an idea. So let's take a few soundings. This is where our dry pocket is going toward 21Z. I think this is going to be right around storm initiation time. So we'll take one here at Dodge City, right in that dry pocket, and then one down here maybe in western Oklahoma near Elk City. So here we are, 21Z, 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time. And again, these surface temperatures are pretty laughable here. 55 degrees at the surface at Dodge City. Here in Elk City, 55 degrees as well. Let's take a look just for giggles here at the overall surface temperatures that the NWS in Norman has this afternoon. So we'll click on Elk City. Remember, the NAM had a temperature of 55 degrees at 4 p.m. So let's go to the hourly weather forecast. This is at Elk City, Oklahoma in western Oklahoma. So here we are, 4 p.m., and you can see right there the temperature is about 67, 68 degrees. So that is a 13-degree difference from what the NAM is forecasting. So we're going to modify this in our heads, and assuming probably a little bit cooler farther to the north there up in Dodge City, slightly higher terrain up there. So probably, but still, if we were to see a temperature of maybe 64 degrees, 64 over 49, that's going to really erode this cap pretty rapidly as well. Again, we'll have such strong kinematics coming in with that shortwave, with the cold air aloft. I think this is just a pretty awful depiction of the thermodynamics here in this environment. So keep that in mind here with the NAM. Let's try to look at the RAP, maybe another model to see if we can get a little bit better thermodynamics here at this point in the afternoon in this setup. Yeah, this is much more accurate. So this is the RAP model at 21Z, 66 over 54. That is much closer to what reality is going to be. You can see that capping inversion, pretty much a thing of the past, as we have very steep lapse rates for working in 8 to 9 degrees Celsius per kilometer there in the mid levels of the atmosphere, leading to modest but adequate instability, over 600 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE. So I expect that to be enough to initiate storms here, especially with convergence along the dry line being pretty strong. Plenty of impetus for storm development along the dry line, despite somewhat meager instability at the surface. So we'll look at the NAM wind profile as well, just to look at the wind profiles. Already you can see that low-level jet maintains itself throughout the day, 40 to 45 knots or so of flow there at about a kilometer off the surface. Here down to the south, much of the same. So already a favorable wind profile in place. And again, keep those thermodynamics in your back pocket. They're not something that we need right now, especially this NAM run. This is just a terrible depiction of the thermodynamics. Want you to pay attention more so to the wind profile. Looks very, very favorable for all severe hazards, including tornadoes at this point. And it's only 4 p.m. in the afternoon. Wrap model, much of the same. Nice veering and strengthening winds with height at this point, and strong deep layer shear for supercells. So let's go ahead and look at 0Z. By this point, we've started to see that little pocket that dry pocket work its way out of the area. A little bit better moisture down here in western Oklahoma, so we'll take a sounding there. We'll take one here in far southwest Kansas. Areas farther to the north, in the northern portion of the slight risk, I think may struggle. We start to see a little bit of a decrease in deep layer shear the farther north you go toward the Nebraska border. So I think the storm mode up here will be have a little bit of a tendency to be more of a multi-cell, supercell mix and more of a clustered, messier mode up here from kind of west central Kansas northward into the Nebraska-Kansas border region. So our main area where our best kinematics are going to be down here in that southwest Kansas, western Oklahoma corridor. So here we are. This is southwest Kansas at this point, and this is just terrible. A terrible depiction of the overall thermodynamics here on the NAM. So we're just going to throw this model out. But this is down here in southwest Kansas. I don't believe that to be the case. Let's take a wrap sounding here at 0Z. Wow, this is the wrap depiction of the dry line here. Very stout dry line bulge there coming into western Oklahoma, just west of the Oklahoma City metro area, I-40 corridor. Nice little tongue there up in southwest Kansas as well. Looks like the surface low somewhere in there as well. So that moisture feeding up into the surface low nicely. This is a classic setup for a Southern Plains tornado event. So let's take a sounding in southwest Kansas here just to see and compare it to the NAM, because I think this is just an absolutely terrible depiction of the overall thermodynamics in southwest Kansas. Yeah, that's a lot better. So this is basically south and southeast of the Dodge City, Kansas area. So somewhere like Coldwater, Medicine Lodge, Pratt, Kansas. Adequate instability, 1,200 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, 62/49 there at the surface. Even though we have upper 40s dew points here, maybe still a little bit of influence from that dry pocket aloft. Plenty of instability with such cold air aloft. Our 500 millibar temperatures, they're at negative 20 degrees Celsius. So very cold air aloft, very steep lapse rates aloft, leading to robust instability, especially for this time of year, and those wind profiles extremely favorable for tornadic supercells. Here is the NAM depiction. NAM depiction even of the wind profile sucks up there in southwest Kansas. So we're just going to omit the NAM altogether, especially for southwest Kansas. But that is very, very favorable for an all-hazards threat, including tornadoes. Perhaps, again, a strong tornado or two as the temperature dew point spread, 62/49. Even though we have 49-degree dew points, the temperature dew point spread's definitely on the well within our threshold for tornadic activity. So would not be surprised to see the SPC upgrade here, maybe to a 10% unhatched, but would not be surprised to see them upgrade to a 10% unhatched, or 10% hatched here across this area for perhaps a strong tornado or two. But I think a few tornadoes are fairly likely with these discrete supercells this afternoon from southwest Kansas down into western Oklahoma. Here is the NAM depiction of western Oklahoma, and my gosh, look at that wind profile. That is just a classic textbook profile for significant tornadoes. You can see very strong streamwise vorticity in the low levels of the atmosphere. So when your storm relative wind vector, let me draw that again a little bit better, your storm relative wind vector and your horizontal vorticity vector, which is to the left and perpendicular to the hodograph, are pretty much parallel to each other. And we see that very much is the case through the first few kilometers of the atmosphere. So strong streamwise vorticity in the low levels of the atmosphere, with super strong low-level shear, strongly veering and strengthening winds with height. Our low-level jet increasing here by 0Z to 50 to 60 knots. That is pretty darn good. Over 500 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity. So again, if we add 60s dew points here in this region, and we're getting close. The NAM has mid to slight, almost upper 50s dew points at this point in western Oklahoma. So if that is the case, Would not be surprised to see a 10% hatched here put out in our next outlook by the SPC. I think a strong tornado or two definitely on the table for today, despite somewhat meager moisture. This wind profile, you can't ignore this wind profile, and with slightly better moisture perhaps than what previous days models were showing, I think we could see a strong tornado threat materialize here across western Oklahoma, northwest Oklahoma, far southwest Kansas, especially there. Though it looks to me like that western Oklahoma corridor may be the play here today for a tornado threat, and perhaps a strong tornado threat, with a discrete supercell mode favored. A strong deep layer shear for supercells. Instability looking pretty good as well. Look at that. This almost looks like a cold core profile. You see a lot of that instability, very fat instability, shoved below 500 millibars. So that is going to yield pretty robust low and mid-level updrafts, steep lapse rates aloft. Almost 1,000 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape there. That is, I mean, all in all, this is a pretty good looking profile for all severe hazards, including tornadoes, perhaps a significant tornado or two. Doesn't get much better than this from a chasing perspective as far as kinematics go. So definitely folks in western Oklahoma to far southwest Kansas need to be on alert today for a tornado threat, perhaps significant tornado threat, with a little bit better moisture creeping in closer to sunset, probably again after 5 or 6 p.m. when the moisture recovers after that little dry pocket comes through. That better moisture going to be seeping its way into this region. As a chaser, I'm getting excited. For folks in this region, I'm definitely getting a little bit concerned, again, for southwest Kansas to western Oklahoma ahead of the dry line here, especially ahead of that dry line bulge maybe. We're starting to see western Oklahoma as possibly the target today for any storm chasing activities. But let's go back to the NAM here and go to the overnight hours. Here we are at 3Z. That profile should continue. I mean, just look at the low-level jet here. Here's our low-level jet through the day, maintains itself through the day, then really ramps up after dark. So wind profile is going to maintain a very strong low-level shear component going into the after dark hours. Here we are at 3Z. Again, storm mode should begin to degrade at this point as the forcing increases, but we still will have a tornado threat as the QLCS moves off to the east. I mean, that is about as good as it gets for a tornado profile, and could maybe even a strong spin-up tornado or two within the QLCS moving to the east. I hate to be hyperbolic here. I never like to be hyperbolic with these setups because I like to deal in facts. But I am giving you my opinion here, and my opinion is that we could see a strong tornado threat materialize with this setup. So, again, I can't stress it enough. Folks in western Oklahoma to southwest Kansas, so pretty much the Dodge City area eastward toward places like Pratt, Medicine Lodge, Greensburg, even over toward the Wichita corridor. As we go toward the overnight hours, we see that better moisture creep up in toward the Wichita area, which is right in here. We could see that strong tornado threat materialize going into the overnight hours. And you see 60s dew points up in here creeping into central Oklahoma. As the mode degrades into a line, we could see some strong spin-up tornadoes that could include the Oklahoma City metro area going into the overnight hours tonight. So folks in western Oklahoma, the entire western half of Oklahoma, southwest Kansas, need to be on alert. Even into northwest Texas as well, even including the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex, we could see a threat continue for you as we go into the overnight hours tonight. Here's a sounding from North Texas. I mean, if we have a QLCS ongoing, plenty of low-level shear for tornadoes there, some spin-up tornadoes in the line. So looks to me like it's going to be a busy night here across the southern plains, especially as we get the coverage of storms to increase and those kinematics stay pretty healthy for a tornado threat, perhaps a strong tornado threat moving through the overnight hours. So again, I apologize for using hyperbole here, but this setup really is starting to look a little bit better to me than it did a couple days ago as we're getting this new model data in and new observed data in this morning. Looks like a pretty potent setup for all hazards, including the threat for tornadoes, maybe a strong tornado or two from late this afternoon in through the overnight hours across southern Kansas, much of Oklahoma, including the Oklahoma City metro area, and parts of north and central Texas, including perhaps the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. All right, let's take a look at tomorrow, Monday, March 25th. I apologize for rambling on about today's setup, but it's such an interesting setup and really such a classic setup for tornadic activity in the central and southern plains. So folks, definitely be aware in these areas today as we go, especially into the late afternoon and early evening hours tonight. So All right, let's look at tomorrow. So we'll start off at this evening, and we'll go back to our 500 millibar map on the NAM. So here's that lead shortwave moving through the central and southern plains. That's the leading edge of the stronger flow aloft starting to impinge upon western Oklahoma, southwest Oklahoma, and central Texas. That is going to continue to eject off to the northeast as we go into the morning hours tomorrow. We'll probably have convection ongoing from tonight, moving across the eastern half of Oklahoma into northeast Texas. Going into the morning hours tomorrow. So we'll have storms ongoing. They probably will weaken eventually, although with such strong low-level flow remaining over the area, we could see those storms stay pretty potent going into the morning hours tomorrow. But we are expecting some weakening going into the morning tomorrow before re-intensification tomorrow afternoon. So here's our setup. This is going to be at 18Z tomorrow, so 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Here's our main little shortwave. Shortwave has ejected off to the east up in here, kind of flattened out a little bit. But it is a little bit more enhanced up in here, a little bit more enhanced flow in that region, indicative of some sort of little shortwave there across, moving into the Iowa vicinity tomorrow. And then our main trough going to continue to eject off to the east into the far southern U.S., and we'll have plenty of broad southwesterly flow out ahead of that across Texas into Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas for tomorrow. Nice defluence aloft you see already at 500 millibars, but let's take a look at 250 millibars. Pretty solid defluence aloft here, a little bit more southerly component across Oklahoma and Kansas, a little bit more west-southwesterly component there across the Gulf Coast region. So some modest defluence aloft across this region to give that rising motion here to support the continuation of storms into the early afternoon hours, the continuation and perhaps redevelopment of storms or reintensification of storms into the afternoon hours tomorrow. So overall, synoptically, the setup looks pretty good. The overall trough itself starts to take on a much more neutral to negative, maybe slightly negative tilt as we go into the afternoon tomorrow. You see the trough starts to swing through, takes on a bit more of a negative tilt there going into the afternoon and evening hours tomorrow. So synoptically, plenty of forcing for ascent here, which will continue to overspread the region there in the southern portions of the risk area going into tomorrow afternoon and evening, which will support that continuation of robust severe weather into the overnight hours tomorrow. We'll go down to the surface here, back it up a little bit. And so our surface low, main surface low, going to eject off to the northeast with the main shortwave. It is going to get a little bit more strung out, and this is not quite as far north as we had it in prior runs. Let me go back here. So here's our current run of the NAM, 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time tomorrow. Main surface low, now up here in eastern Kansas. And previous runs were a lot different. A couple days ago, we had that surface low well up into Iowa. So I'm going to go back a few runs here, and you can see the change. So here is the run that we looked at for our video a couple days ago. And we had that surface low well up in here across this region of Iowa, kind of central Iowa. And now, again, we've seen a pretty, and it was a little bit more tightly wound, a little bit better look to it for a severe weather threat up here ahead of the surface low across parts of Iowa, perhaps northern Missouri, northwest Illinois. But now that surface low has slowed down a little bit. It's been strung out a little bit, but we still have a nice warm sector making its way up into Iowa, parts a little bit farther west than what was initially expected. The SPC has shifted that potential risk area a little bit farther to the west than what we saw with earlier runs. But this is not all that favorable, not quite as favorable up here for the northern mode. For a kind of classic cold core type setup. We were talking how cold core it looked a few days ago. This is not exactly the most textbook look for a cold core event. You want that 500 millibar trough closed low here and trough in close proximity, which we do have, but you want that surface low. You see that activity right ahead, immediately ahead of the surface low on the warm front. And here we have a little bit of a different configuration to the setup up here across this region. We'll bring back the surface pattern here. College DuPage having a little bit of trouble loading here over the past couple days. Not sure what's going on there. But here is our surface low, kind of the center of the low here in eastern Kansas. The warm front probably stretches up something like this. It's very, very weird. It's a little bit difficult to pinpoint. Trying to put it in the wind shift, it looks maybe something like this. A little bit hard to put it in, so not quite the optimal orientation for a cold core tornadic event. And again, it's not purely cold core because we don't have the mid and upper level pattern that is typical with a cold core event. But this is overall the surface pattern not quite typical for a classic cold core event. So definitely backing off on the overall intensity of the event up here for the Iowa portion, the Iowa risk area tomorrow. Going down to the southern portions of the risk area. we may see a little bit of a secondary surface low develop going into the afternoon hours tomorrow. So here we go. Here is our surface low, a little bit zoomed in here. So our main surface low there across eastern Kansas, and then we see a little bit of something develop there, perhaps across the Arklatex area moving off to the northeast. That could be convectively enhanced, and the NAM may be a little bit off here. Let's take a look at the GFS and see what it has. Just to see here, the NAM again has been a little bit wonky this run, especially with the overall environmental profiles here. So I don't know how much I actually do trust it. And so let's take a look at the GFS. So this is going to be the 6Z GFS here from this morning. And so, or from early this morning. So you can see that surface low up across the Kansas-Missouri border region, and we might get a little bit of maybe a convectively enhanced vorticity maximum down here, but it does not look like as strong of a surface low that develops. Perhaps out here, as we go into the evening hours today, we might see a little bit there, but that is going to be along our ongoing squall line here, moving across Louisiana into Arkansas and Mississippi. So I think that might be a little bit convectively enhanced there. So in previous runs, we saw a little bit more of a surface low develop out here across the Arklatex region. Doesn't look like that's as much the case here. So that may lead to a somewhat weaker low-level response. Let's take a look at the moisture here, and we'll go back to the NAM. So here we are this evening with our moisture return. As we said, strong moist advection going to be ongoing throughout this entire event. So we're going to get those 60s dew points up ahead of the dry line eventually, and that will really take place going into tomorrow. So you can see that warm sector a little bit more pinched off now in the NAM's latest depiction of the warm sector. If we go back a couple days, let me go back to our previous runs. We saw on our previous video that we had a much wider warm sector, much broader warm sector back here. And you can see this is what we were dealing with our the model run we used for our video a couple days ago. A little bit broader of a warm sector here, a little bit more real estate for a robust severe threat to occur. And now we're dealing with a little bit more pinched look to things. This is at 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time tomorrow. A little bit more pinched warm sector, especially with northward extent. So not a ton of real estate for there to be any significant severe weather, particularly from prefrontal supercells out here across this region. But we should see a maintenance of the storms along the overall cold front dry line feature as it shifts off to the east. But it doesn't look like there's much real estate for prefrontal supercells, except maybe down here along the Gulf Coast. But overall, not really looking all that favorable. Not as favorable as what it was looking like a couple days ago when we had a little bit more of a more robust low-level surface flow response out here across the Arklatex to have a bit of a broader warm sector. But let's take a couple soundings here. We'll take one here maybe at Monroe, Louisiana. We'll take one down here across the south central Louisiana portion of the risk. Wow. So the wind profiles, not going to have a problem with the wind profiles at all. I mean, that is really impressive. Strong streamwise vorticity in the low levels of the atmosphere, strongly veering and strengthening winds with height with that intense low-level jet. Limited instability, however, and this is the NAM again, so take this with a grain of salt, but we probably will have enough instability to support a robust severe threat, but overall, perhaps not a really robust severe threat if we were to see a little bit stronger thermodynamics with this setup. But the wind profile is certainly favorable for some tornadoes there. If we can get prefrontal discrete supercells, and let's take a look at that here in just a little bit, see if we see any prefrontal troughs. Pretty uniform flow out in the surface warm sector here. We'll take a look at 850 millibars if we see any convergence in the warm sector. Not really. Our frontal zone probably back in there. Not much going on in the warm sector, so it doesn't really look like we're going to see overall the chances for prefrontal discrete supercells. But if we can get a couple discrete supercells to fire up out ahead of the main line, those would pose a strong tornado threat. But for now, it looks pretty conditional given limited instability that is expected to take shape across this region for tomorrow. So again, the threat will continue into the overnight hours as we get the continuation of that strong low-level flow. Warm sector does remain here across this area. Here we are at 6Z, so just after midnight across the southeast, and I would suspect the wind profile stay pretty strong. We'll see if we get instability there. A little bit better instability with time here in this setup. Plenty of low-level shear for a tornado threat, so could see several spin-up tornadoes within the line. and we could see some damaging winds really be a threat, as well as those stronger gusts are mixed down to the surface. So damaging wind threat, a few tornadoes here expected across this region. Not expecting the storm mode to cooperate for a more robust tornado threat, but we could see maybe a strong tornado or two given strong low-level shear in this environment. But overall, not the most favorable southeast setup for a really robust, significant tornado threat. So that's what it's looking like tomorrow. We'll take a quick sounding here up in the Iowa portion of the risk area just to show you what it's looking like. So here we go into Monday afternoon across Iowa. Just a sounding to show you what things are going to look like up there. We'll have a plume of instability up here from far northeast Kansas, maybe northwest Missouri into western Iowa. So that will be where we have the threat for a few low-top storms with maybe a brief, marginally severe hail and wind. We do see a little bit of low-level instability there with some low-level shear. So again, I would not be surprised to see them put out a low tornado risk for that area tomorrow. But I think main threat's going to be marginally severe hail and marginally severe wind for that setup up there in Iowa tomorrow. All right, last thing we'll look at, couple of cams for today's setup. So this is the 12Z HRRR. We'll look at our whole Central Plains sector. So you see a little bit of warm advection stuff going on through the day. Not going to be much of an issue. I think we'll have plenty of insulation behind this round ahead of the dry line out here across western Oklahoma, southwest Kansas. And we start to see storms fire here. We see robust storms fire both in southwest Kansas and northwest Oklahoma, closer to the surface low, and down here across western Oklahoma along the dry line. This was not being modeled over the past couple of days. We were not seeing robust supercells being modeled by these cams over the last couple of days. Now we're starting to see, at least the HRRR run here, we'll see if our other cams support it, but we're starting to see some robust supercells tracking in the general direction of the Oklahoma City metro, and then eventually storms start to congeal into more of a line going into the overnight hours as the forcing increases, as that Pacific front catches up with the dry line. Pretty much quick transition to a squall line once that happens, but you can see a several hour window for discrete supercells here, developing probably by 20 to 21Z, 3 to 4 p.m. Again, some drier air here at this point, but if storms can survive and we can have additional attempts down here farther to the south along the dry line, those would be able to take advantage of the better moisture and give ourselves a robust tornado threat. But you can see some robust supercells in there, far southwest Kansas, southern Kansas as well. So discrete supercells likely here with an all hazards threat. Let's take now a look at the ARW model, the WRF ARW model. So here we are going through the day, a little bit of warm advection stuff early on, and then we have supercells firing along the dry line there across western Oklahoma, southwest Kansas here by mid to late afternoon. That would again pose a strong tornado threat. That would be moving in the general direction of the Woodward area. Those are pretty long track supercells, not all that surprising with such strong deep layer shear at play, such strong low level shear. So that is going to foster that definitely some concerning looks here on the convection allowing models. They're starting to converge on the solution of several discrete supercells that would pose a tornado threat in this environment, especially as we get better moisture going in the afternoon. Here we go. This is the NSSL WRF model. A little bit of a weird depiction of the dryline kind of vomiting convection here early on. Not sure that's going to be the case. Don't really see that happening, but you can see how things transition into more of a supercell mode. That is very close to the Oklahoma City metro area this evening, so we'll have to watch that for sure. And then instability should really stay the same. We're not going to have strong stabilization at the surface given really strong low-level warm moist advection going into the evening hours. So these would pose an all-hazards threat going into the central Oklahoma area this evening. Oklahoma City metro definitely needs to watch out this evening for this threat. Let's look at the MPAS. The MPAS HT not quite in yet, so we'll look at the other MPAS models here. Again, these did pretty well with that setup in Kansas a few weeks, about a week and a half ago, the Alta Vista day. So we'll see how things look today, and the MPAS has stuff there in southwest Kansas, a little bit messier. Again, this is the 0Z run, so yesterday evening. So we won't put too much stock into this, but just wanted to see what these look like. And we will maybe take a look at the other member as well that is in for us. But this definitely is starting to get concerned for, I'll just say that, for southwest Kansas into western Oklahoma, perhaps central Oklahoma, as these cams are locking into a solution of multiple discrete supercells this afternoon into evening. I mean, that's pretty, you have supercells up there in northwest Oklahoma, some down along the dry line there in western Oklahoma would have a tornado threat, perhaps a strong tornado threat. Again, would not be surprised to see SPC upgrade here in their next outlook, but this is all overall a very favorable look for a tornadic supercell type event. So definitely getting a little bit concerned here with this setup for today. Again, slight risk out for today. We'll see what they do with the next outlook. But for now, slight risk extends all the way up to the Nebraska-Kansas border, north of the Colby-Goodland area, stretching down through southwest and south central Kansas into western Oklahoma, including the Oklahoma City metro, including Wichita, places like Garden City, Dodge City, Greensburg, Kansas, Coldwater, Pratt, Medicine Lodge up toward Colby, Oakley, Goodland, and areas in between, under the gun for the greatest severe threat today. For now, 5% tornado risk, really focusing on the southern portions of the risk area, southwest Kansas into western and central Oklahoma, with a 2% surrounding those areas, and a large hail threat, as well as a damaging wind threat for today's setup. Very concerned here that the tornado threat is going to come to fruition given these kinematics and a discrete supercell wind profile and moisture looking a little bit better than it did in days past. Tomorrow, once again, mostly going to be a QLCS squall line down here in the slight risk area from basically Louisiana into Mississippi. Nocturnal tornado threat will be supported with strong low-level shear in place, and perhaps a low-end severe threat up there in western Iowa as well. So pretty complex severe threat going into the next couple of days. I think today definitely could be fruitful for chasers, and folks out here in these portions, especially of southwest Kansas into western Oklahoma, need to be on alert for that tornado threat, perhaps a significant tornado threat. We'll see what the SPC does with their next outlook here in just a little bit. So that's going to do it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.